All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. This is session 2 of Reclaiming Patriotism. This session is titled American Crossroads, and we are going to examine how white supremacy has long fueled America's refusal to share power and how that has infected the promise and have left us divided in this quest that we are looking for in terms of justice for all. My name is Ivory Kennedy Jr., and I am an Institute Educator Ambassador, as well as one-third of the Educator for Democracy team. I also serve as a middle childhood education program manager here at The Ohio State University. Talking about Common Power, which is the overarching organization, okay, that houses the Institute. Common Power is a group that mobilizes voters, okay? We are an organization that mobilizes voters in honor of the work that was done from the 1965 Voters' Rights Act. And all that we aim to do is advocate for a strong and just and inclusive democracy for this nation. The Institute for Common Power, however, is the educational arm of this organization. We are dedicated to challenging these systems of injustice through expansive and strategic and experiential learning tours and different excursions that we do all across the South. Today, you are involved with one of the lectures that we have. We also have workshops, conferences, truth and purpose learning experiences, which I will talk about here in a second. So these numbers, and for good reason, are a little bit outdated because we have done more than 20 learning tours with over 500 participants, as well as more than 130 educators. Some of you educators are on the call. This is where we go down south, whether that is to Alabama and Georgia or Tennessee and Mississippi. We go to where the history happens. We are led by our director, Dr. Terry Ann Scott, our fearless leader, as I like to say, who does everything that she can to make sure that we go not just to where the history happens, but allow that history to guide us to the future. And hopefully I do a bit of justice tonight talking about just where we've come from and where we are headed. Speaking of events, I'm going to drop these here in the chat. Starting on February 1st, we are going to have another teach-in. That is how I got involved with the Institute for Common Power, was a teach-in. It transformed my entire understanding of what it is that this organization was aimed to do. You will learn more about that should you join us. It is how the Montgomery bus boycott changed everything, featuring Dr. Scott, Dr. Williams, and Dr. Domke. And then, in the spirit of reclaiming this thing called democracy, Dr. Scott is leading a series as well on February 4th and the 11th, and you can catch that at this link as well. Okay. And again, remember the motto, not just you, but bring a few. Okay. Not just you, but bring a few. So today's session agenda. Okay, today's session agenda. We are done with the welcome. We're going to go over current events, talk about a little bit of what we talked about in session 1, deep dive into white supremacy, and then the final session, which is going to be the next Thursday. So hopefully I do you justice enough today and you join me in a week. Okay. So current events for this session here in Ohio. Again, I like to start with a local event. Dublin and Westerville High School, they staged a walkout. That is not to be mixed up with what we just experienced on the 20th, 2 days ago, with a national walkout at 2 p.m. for people across the nation. I have heard that it was in response to the current administration. The second, in the theme of what we're talking about today, given white supremacy is the topic, there is an all-white village that is being built in a town in Arkansas. If you are unfamiliar with that, you should give it a look. They are very clear, okay? They are extremely clear about what their aims are and believes that the United States should be for white people. Second to last, the Trump administration gives a nod to white supremacy. If any of you are on social media and following any of the things that have to do with what we see with the federal government, particularly the Department of Homeland Security has continued to issue different propaganda pieces that are echoes of white supremacy. And again, hopefully we can draw some through lines today. And then last but not least, Greenland. Greenland or Iceland, depending on what you are listening to, because the current president was speaking about that at the World Economic Forum yesterday, has kind of backed off of the initial claims of taking over that territory. However, Greenland has created hats that are MAGA that say "Make America Go Away." Again, I think it is very fitting that we ground ourselves in the history of this country as we celebrate America's 250th anniversary. I do not want you to believe or walk away from these sessions thinking that I am blind to the history of this country. I choose to celebrate what has been the contributions from my ancestors, and I allow myself to claim the identity of being an American because of what I know, because of the history that I value, and because of the hopes and aspirations that I feel should be afforded to everybody in this country. So as we talk, as I talk sometimes glowingly about America, it is not without recognition of our past and where we have come from. Now, speaking of what the current president said, I believe he released some messages not too long ago. And those messages said something to the effect of just because a boat lands here or lands somewhere doesn't mean that they own rights to it. Now, let's be honest, we completely understand the history of this country and what is Columbus, right? As I sit here in Columbus, Ohio, as our soccer team is named after Columbus and the crew, we are the Columbus crew, right? It is not lost on me the irony of his statement. However, I do have a question for you all because I like to start off with questions. What comes to mind when you see this? And certain that there are plenty of social studies teachers here in the chat. I am okay if you all go ahead and share the answer. But what comes to your mind as you look at this image?
White supremacy, genocide, manifest destiny, justification for murder.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I want you to keep that question because this is not an altered image. This is what was posted online on Instagram, okay, by the Department of Homeland Security in conjunction with the White House. It is a picture of Manifest Destiny, and it says a heritage to be proud of, a homeland worth defending. Okay. Again, current events matter. Okay, this was not one day ago. This was maybe a month ago when I captured this image. But it is this type of propaganda that is being shared across social media like wildfire. Okay, and those of us that are historians or practicing historians, or at least are aware and have certain levels of historical consciousness, right? This is what is being perpetuated. And if you have been miseducated about the history of this country, then you very well might believe that what they are, proposing here in this image is right. Okay. And we know, those of us that have a heart, we know that it's not so. All right. So thinking about supremacy, okay, thinking about supremacy, what does it mean to you? You can contribute that in the chat or not. I kind of want you to just think about what have you heard of in terms of supremacy? We know white supremacy exists. That is the core foundation of this country. But when we hear the word supremacy, right, think about the word supreme. Okay. Merriam and Webster defines this as a position of unquestioned authority, dominance, or influence. I think the unquestioned part is a little shaky because I feel like those of us that are fighting for a righteous United States, for us to honor what is written in the Declaration and in the Constitution, I think it is fair for us to say that we are indeed questioning this. However, the authority that we are experiencing right now, the dominance that we feel, and the influence on the minds of millions of Americans is where I am worried, but not weary. Okay, so this is Merriam-Webster's definition of supremacy. So we talked about manifest destiny, right? This term is not coined until the late or mid to 1800s. However, it captures what these Europeans were talking about. It is the God-given right to expand the territory of the United States. I think what we should be saying is that this was European domination and destruction of natives and indigenous peoples' land, their culture, their communities. We are living in a moment right now where religion is highly talked about. It is very contentious. Um, I was raised to believe that you treat everyone the way that you want to be treated, right? So how could we justify, right? I believe somebody said the justification of this domination, right? The justification of a genocide of people, the justification of ignoring basic human rights that these Europeans were seeking for themselves, right? It is not lost on me. They are seeking religious and economic freedom. Okay, they are seeking religious and economic freedom. So I want to take us back. Okay, we're going to go over some laws. We're going to go over a few things that give us a little bit of an insight to supremacy. Okay, and the idea of white supremacy and how it is continuously infecting our society. So the South Carolina Negro Act of 1740. This is passed in response to an unsuccessful rebellion at the time. Now, I am not exaggerating, okay, when I pull the next portion of this, okay? I am not exaggerating. It was illegal, outlined by this law, for enslaved people to earn their own money, grow their own food, or raise livestock. Racism to me, on its face, makes no sense. You don't like somebody because of what they look like. And oftentimes, that dislike of someone is because of the miseducation of their lived experience or an active refusal of accepting their lived experience as if it takes away something from you. Okay. The Fugitive Slave Acts, I am sure that Dr. Scott is going to go over this when she is talking about the foundation and reclaiming democracy. Um, I want us to think about what this means, though. There are two bills that are passed. Okay, there are two acts that are passed. One in 1793, and then the next is going to strengthen the baseline of that. Again, the purpose of this session is to analyze white supremacy, to make sure that the law is very clear that you do not have this right to run away. We are going to embolden people in our society to do what is right in the minds of the people that are perpetuating this system and catching people that are just seeking freedom. Okay, again, seeking freedom. Yes, yes, yes to the chat. Yes, racism is anti-intellectual, right? I was just talking to a former student of mine. What good does it do for us not to collaborate together? What good does it do for us not to share and strengthen each other's ideas, right? Unless you believe, for whatever reason, that other people are less than. Now, I have this in quotes. Okay, I choose not to use that word for the factual basis of the actual act, the Indigenous or Native People Removal Act of 1830. Again, this is going to lead to the Trail of Tears. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because, again, the acts of supremacy, not allowing African and African Americans at this time period to participate, all right, moving Native people off of their land. And let's think back, right? We go back to the idea of 1492 being this discovery period. Native people have been suffering since the Europeans came with an idea of conquest. Now we are only 30 years before the Civil War really starts to tip off, where we are sending Native people to the west of the Mississippi River. And this is going to happen under a certain administration. And that administration is going to be the seventh president of the United States. This is an actual picture of him towards the later part of his life. And then, as we most infamously know him from the $20 bill. Now, Andrew Jackson was a slave owner. Andrew Jackson kind of broke the mold as the seventh president because he was not like the founders. He was not like the Virginians. Okay. He was from Tennessee. He was rough. He was a war hero. He was a tough guy. Okay. Um, the reason I bring this up is because there is a rhyme of history, an echo, if you will. Over the course of our nation, I really love presidential history. Those of you that know me know how I feel about the presidency. And different presidents have set up their Oval Offices in ways that commemorate what has led them to that very same place. It influences the ideals that they have for the country. Now, this is during his first administration, and there you see an image of Andrew Jackson. Now, if I'm a native person in this land and I see the president commemorating something like this in the Oval Office, I worry about that. Moreover, this Presidential Walk of Fame that has been instituted in the White House, or at least on the outside of the White House, I want to read a little bit that these plaques at the bottom apparently they were heavily influenced by the current president. Okay, they called him Old Hickory. He was known for the Battle of New Orleans, his battle during the War of 1812. And for whatever reason, he says he quotes he's the people's president now. He was one of the he was like the first common man president of the time. But he goes on to say the people's president for championing the common man, but was unjustly treated unfairly by the press, unjustifiably treated unfairly by the press, but was not as viciously and unfairly as Abraham Lincoln and President Trump. I won't go on to continue to read that. But again, what does it mean about a narrative of an administration that was very clear? You have a former slave owner, you have someone that disregards the livelihood of natives. What does that do for a country? What does that do for children that will see this? What does that do for low level information receivers as it relates to the foundation of our country and what it means right now in this time period? So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly because I want to get to the crux of this, right? The Missouri Compromise of 1820. It is going to expand slavery, admitting Maine as a free state. And then we're going to talk about this Missouri Territory, right? Because slavery is a hot button issue. Now, Thomas Jefferson was still alive around this time period. And I want to read what his response was. Okay. In his 70s, his response to this is, we have the wolf by the ears, and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. As we talked about last session, Thomas Jefferson is truly complicated because sometimes he speaks like a true abolitionist. In the founding document, the Declaration of Independence, he outlines that slavery was unjust. Although it did not make it to the final cut, it was written. Thomas Jefferson is extremely complicated. But even in this time period, in the 1820s, he realizes, yeah, this is bad. This is bad. This is not good for the nation because how do you continue to justify it? How do you continue to justify it? You can't. But people will try and have tried. So the Kansas and Nebraska Act happens in 1854, as the continuation of the conversation. Do we expand? You're going to have people traveling from all over. We have an educator ambassador. I'm going to give her a shout out, Kendra. She is in, I believe, Spokane, Washington, and she went to testify and she shared the story about her great grandfather and his travels from the East Coast all the way to fight for what was right. Okay. And then we have John Brown. If you any of you know anything about Harper's Ferry, John Brown, again, religion is a big hot button issue. John Brown believed that it was divine intervention for him to do something. He believed that it was his time, and he not only put his life on the line, but his sons as well to defend this thing called freedom that was outlined in our Constitution and Declaration of Independence. So this is just not a zero-sum game. This is not just African and African Americans asking for this type of freedom that is outlined in the Constitution, but there are people along the way, there are abolitionists along the way that believe in the same thing, that freedom should be applicable to all. Which takes us to the Confederacy. Which takes us to the Confederacy. This is from Monday. This was a celebration of Lee Jackson Day. in opposition to the celebration of Martin Luther King, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I grabbed this picture from a Confederate Facebook group that somehow they accepted me in. I'm not sure how much longer I'll last in there. But I posed the question to the group. I said, what's wrong with celebrating Dr. King Day as well? And some man from North Carolina, because I looked his profile up, he told me in a comment, don't bring that stuff down here. We are still fighting for the good cause. And again, this was just 3 days ago. This is just 3 days ago. So I want to talk about the origins of the solidification of white supremacy. Okay, this is an excerpt from the Cornerstone speech given by Alexander Stephens in March of 1861. So by this time period, the United States is in turmoil because the southern states are deciding that we are not going to accept the results of the election of Abraham Lincoln. And they go on to document this thing. The beautiful thing about white supremacy, if there is anything, is that it is documented for us to point out. They give us the recipe that they have cooked up. We don't have to make anything up as it relates to white supremacy because they've laid it out for us. They've laid it out for us. He goes on to say, our new government is founded upon this idea. Its foundations are laid. Its cornerstone rests upon the great truth that the Negro is not equal to the white man, that slavery, and then defines it, subordination to the superior race, is his natural and normal condition. This, our new government, is the first in the history of the world based on this great physical, philosophical, and moral truth. The great physical, philosophical, and moral truth. Obviously, the Confederacy loses the physical war, okay? However, the vice president of the Confederacy, he owned over 30 and enslaved 30 people himself. And after the Civil War, he was then elected to Congress and then later went on to serve as governor of Georgia. Now we're going to take a deeper dive into the Confederacy because how could someone that once pledged allegiance to the United States of America swear to then protect its homeland, meaning the Confederacy, the Confederate States of America, and then be trusted to then swear another oath to the Constitution? And then what do we think happened with those policies? We know what happened with those policies. We are dealing with the fallout of those this very moment today. So how could he go from being an enslaver to the vice president of the Confederacy to then serving in Congress? Okay, sorry about that. Then serving in Congress, and then all of a sudden finding his way as the executive leader of a state. Well, we have this man to thank. Dr. Scott often says that he ranks among some of the worst of the presidents, maybe number two. Okay, maybe number two. So the aftermath of losing the war, Reconstruction is underway, and Andrew Johnson in May 29th of 1865 is going to issue the Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction. This is going to offer pardons to most of the Confederates as long as they pledged to the United States, pledged loyalty to the U.S., and accepted emancipation. They were required to take an oath of allegiance, swearing that they are going to support the Constitution as it relates to the laws with ending slavery, right? We think about the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment and what those meant at that time period. In December of 1868, President Johnson is going to issue a universal pardon for the former Confederates and is going to start removing the restrictions that had once been laid upon them and start to restore their civil rights. Over 13,000 of these pardons are going to be issued. And as we saw what happened with Alexander Stevens, many of those Confederates are going to return to political power, and they undermine the efforts of Reconstruction. Okay, our very own president from Ohio, Rutherford B. Hayes, struck a deal. Okay, he's going to strike a deal to allow Reconstruction efforts to be left up to the states, right? And I want to make sure that we can fight back this argument because what I have been told, and I'm sure some of you have heard this too, that this Civil War was about states' rights. And my question is, in response to enslavement, right? It wasn't about slavery, it was about states' rights. I'll allow someone to say that because the question I have for them is states' rights to do what? And again, that answer takes us back to slavery. So they can have the argument about states' rights, but it was their right to continue the enslavement of African and African Americans. So thinking about the lost cause, these three images that are on the left side of your screen are some of the textbooks and books that were written during the time period where the romanticization, okay, the romanticism of what we now know to be this lost cause. I highlighted a portion of this, okay, but the American South as a captive nation, yes, just like Poland and the other former Soviet satellites. The South with a right to nationhood, separate from the rest of the United States, yes, with just as much of a right to break away and determine its own destiny as the original 13 colonies. So not only are they taking the idea behind what led us to our nation to that point, but they then hijack that identity. They hijack that reasoning. They hijack the point of democracy and say, oh, but we're going to do it this way down here. Okay. The idea that the South will rise again, I'm sure that we have all heard that at some point. I feel like we could all be on the same page and say we are experiencing an echo, we are experiencing a rhyme of this lost cause mythology. For those of you that have been on the learning tours, when we go down to Selma, Alabama, okay, Selma is a place of great historic achievement of African American efforts. It is also a place of dare I say, for forgottenness, because not enough is being done down there. The Institute and Common Power are doing our part. We're doing our part down there, but not enough, because the 65 Voters' Rights Act was not just for African Americans, right? It was for America. It was for us reaching the promise of America. We congregate at the Confederate Cemetery, though, in Selma, if you can believe that, for those of you that have not had the pleasure of being down there. But this is this reassertion, okay? This is a quote from Jefferson Davis. He says, the principles for which we contended will reassert themselves in another form and another time. I think it is impossible for us to separate what we are experiencing right now as a country and where our history has taken us. The beautiful thing is that they put this on paper. They believed this themselves and they documented it for us. So why not use this against all of these ideas, right? People want to talk about those of us that fight for an inclusive and a just democracy. They try to blame us and say that you all are the ones that make these things about race. You all are the ones that makes these things about skin color. It is at the founding of our country where that was outlined, and what are we supposed to do with that? I think today we use that to our advantage. With that being said, I would like to share a video with you because not enough is talked about what goes on behind the scenes. We know these major figureheads. Okay, we've experienced these people who have done great harm to us, but we don't lay enough responsibility at the feet of those who are working very diligently behind the scenes. So I'm going to play this. I'm not going to play the beginning of it. But I'm gonna let this thing run because I'm not sure how many of us have taken enough of a deep dive, and I'll talk to you all on the other side.
Listen to how this textbook describes slavery. The master often had. The UDC was founded in Nashville in 1894 to preserve Confederate culture for generations to come. The women who made up the group descended from elite antebellum families, and they used their social and political clout to spread the pro-Southern version of the war as real history. You've probably seen their efforts to honor the Confederacy, but maybe you didn't know it was the UDC. They're the ones who covered the Southern landscape with memorials for Confederate leaders and soldiers. They used their fundraising and lobbying skills to pressure local governments into erecting monuments in prominent public spaces like courthouses and state capitals.
Installed here next to the state capitol by the United Daughters of the Confederacy.
The United Daughters of the Confederacy donated this memorial to the city back in the 30s.
They put them along roadsides and in parks. Any place that was remotely relevant to the Confederacy was memorialized. By the early 20th century, the UDC had 100,000 members in chapters spread all over the country, but mostly in former Confederate states. And there's a reason they grew so quickly during that time.
So we're talking about roughly 3 decades after the end of the war, and the Confederate veterans themselves are beginning to die off. So there is this push to find ways to commemorate it, because the big challenge by 1900 was there's a new generation of white Southerners being born, and they never experienced the war years.
That push is visible. Most of the Confederate monuments were erected during the UDC's height of influence.
There's a rhetoric around monuments that we want to get this thing built before all of that generation has died off. And the reason we want it is to teach future generations about those men.
Dr. Karen Cox wrote the book on the UDC, and I asked her if it was fair to say the group established the lost cause as historical fact in the South.
Oh my God, yeah. They were the leaders of the lost cause into the 20th century, and they made it a movement about vindication.
Just to give you an idea of how effective they were, they successfully lobbied for a Confederate memorial in Arlington National Cemetery, which U.S. President Woodrow Wilson proudly unveiled to a cheering crowd. Now that's influence, right?
Monuments are the least of what they did.
What?
I mean, they are the most visible, tangible, but the work with children was far more influential.
It turns out a central UDC objective is shaping how children think about the war and their Southern heritage. One of their most powerful tools? Textbooks. Take a look at this pamphlet called A Measuring Rod for Textbooks. It was written by the illustrious Southern historian Miss Mildred Rutherford, an educator, orator, and author of Southern history textbooks. She's also very pro-slavery. The pamphlet announced the formation of a textbook review committee featuring prominent Southerners like 5 former Confederate generals. This group was committed to spreading the truths of Confederate history, so they instructed school boards to reject any textbooks that did not accord full justice to the South. And they urged libraries to deface every book in their collection that didn't measure up by writing the words "unjust to the South" clearly on its cover. This pamphlet was shared widely with school boards throughout the South, and UDC-backed committees closely monitored history books to make sure Northern influence never reached classrooms. So the core language of an approved textbook aligned precisely with that of the lost cause. You know, stuff like,
The Confederacy lost in the war between the states, but Georgia never forgot to honor her Confederate soldiers.
History of Georgia was on the UDC's approved list. It was also written by E. Merton Coulter, a self-described Southern historian and historian-described white supremacist.
They understand that how you educate, who wins the writing game, who wins the battle over history, ultimately wins the war. That's the big fight for the UDC.
But their work with children went further than the classrooms. The UDC formed an auxiliary group called the Children of the Confederacy, which was designed to get kids born in former Confederate states to actively participate in their version of history. Group leaders had kids recite call and response truths from something called the Confederate Catechism. Children up to the age of 18 would compete and be rewarded for memorizing long passages of lost cause rhetoric.
So it would be like an after school thing, like that was your club. You would go after school to the meeting of the Children of the Confederacy, and your leader might teach you songs of the South like Dixie or other songs that were considered Southern patriotic songs. They would have them write essays, go visit the veterans, and learn this catechism.
Children were also the centerpiece of their community's monument unveilings, like this living flag at the dedication of the Stonewall Jackson Monument in Richmond. Yes, those are school children. The UDC's efforts shaped shaped the identities of children who grew up with the lost cause. They made history personal, and that made their story last longer.
Generations of children learning that narrative in a variety of ways grow up to be, segregationists in the 50s and 60s, because that's been drilled into them since they were children.
After World War I, the UDC started losing steam, but the damage was done. The monuments were in place, and the textbooks they wrote remained in Southern classrooms until the late 70s. And the women's group did it all without the right to vote or participate in politics.
You can still get glimmers of this lost cause memory of the war from people who will always choose to see it through the personal. And I think the UDC, to a great extent, was their goal.
So the next time someone says the Confederate monuments are about remembering our history, just know that that's exactly what the United Daughters of the Confederacy wants you to think. Listen to how the...
All right, let's take a second to process. Okay. Let's take a second to process. I am not here to convince you one way or the other about politics. I could care less about politics. Politics is about elections, to my understanding. Policy is what I care about. I don't care who the president is. I want policy to be beneficial for all Americans. I don't care who the governor is. I want their policy to be beneficial for the constituents in that state. I don't care about anything other than the policy that you put forth. And if you are putting forth harmful policy, that is where I then have to criticize you. That is where I have to then speak. I think we do a disservice by watering this down to politics. Let's really focus and aim on the policies. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but as the Daughters of Confederacy, they would go to school board meetings. They pursued textbook commissions. Think about what it means for a child to grow up learning and listening to these things. This is not long ago. Okay, this is not long ago. I think the most critical part is this after school idea, this program about the children, putting this thing in front of these kids and convincing them. If this is happening in the 50s, then those people are still alive today. The same people that grew up as children in a time period learning this stuff grow up to then think, what about the United States? This idea of heritage, okay? Heritage is legacy. What is the legacy of the South? It is plain and clear. Minimizing slavery, downplaying secession, and glorifying Confederates. Over 200 schools were named after Confederate leaders due to the United Daughters of the Confederacy. And a study that came out, a report by the Southern Poverty Law Center, then said that there were about 240 schools that carry Confederate names, serving over 195,000 students, to which 1 in 3 were Black. Imagine going to a school as an African American that is named after a Confederate general or a Confederate soldier. What does that mean about those students? They had essay contests, school clubs. I believe, and for those of you that were on the more recent trip down to the state capitol, but a tour guide at the Alabama state capitol, we were in Montgomery. A tour guide said that they were given a tour to maybe 3rd or 4th graders, and correct me if I'm messing that up, where she said that there was a young boy that admitted that he was a part of a Confederacy group that was still alive and well and functioning like in today, right? This is 2026, so this was last year in 2025, but this was a real thing, okay? This was a real thing. What rhyme or echo do we see to the Daughters of the Confederacy, though? What rhymes do we see today? We have an educator ambassador that was targeted by this group. I've been banned on, I believe it was Instagram or Facebook from this group because I continuously challenge what it is that they say they stand for. So let's take a look. How we fight, holding leaders accountable, spreading awareness, the idea of limited government, and we see overreaches of that today, opposing government overreach, sounds contradictory, promoting liberty, liberty for who? Liberty for who? Engage on key issues, right? We see those issues. If you don't follow them, you should, get hip to what they're doing. And what is most concerning is this activate to public service. Now, I will get into some of the specifics from what they have provided, but this is on their website. Our mission, we're dedicated to fighting for the survival of America by unifying, educating, and empowering parents to defend their parental rights at all levels of government. The vision, Americans empowered and thriving in a culture of liberty. They claim that the values are standing for truth, building relationships, and empowering others. And yet, how can you do something? How can you do such a thing when you are banning stuff that you don't know? I met with a Republican lawmaker here in the state of Ohio, Representative Byrd. We had a very spirited conversation, and I asked him for a second because we were talking about the Charlie Kirk American Heritage Bill. It is HB 486 here in the state of Ohio. And I asked him, I said, what do you know about DEI? And he looked at me, he kind of perked up his lips and he said, well, it means you didn't earn it. And I asked him, I said, do you really not know what the acronym stands for? And when I broke down what it means in a historical sense, you could see the puzzling look on his face. Now, could I have been being gaslit? Maybe. But I genuinely felt in that moment that I caught him off guard because I don't think anybody had ever posed that question. And I don't go into conversations looking for a fight. I just want to see how well educated are you on the topic. Okay. This movement by this group is nationalized. Okay. At the bottom, you see, he calls this organization, you're not a threat to America, you're the best thing that has ever happened to America. The people that are in the comments of the pages of this organization have called me a DEI hire more times than I care to admit. I can let that roll off because I understand that I've earned my place. The idea that talking about a full and transparent picture of American history, they're banning things like that. They ban books that talk about the history of our nation because they don't want people to feel guilty. The vice president said not too long ago that white America no longer has to apologize for being white. You don't necessarily have to apologize for being white. Your policies should make it so that I can live my life the same way that you have lived yours. Again, policy, not politics. And speaking of policy, this is why the work is necessary. Excuse me. This is why the work is necessary, people. This is why I say not just you, but bring a few. I care about education. I have an 8-year-old who is very brilliant, and he struggles to understand why is racism a thing. And I put in front of him the history of this country, and he shrugs his shoulders. And he just doesn't understand because it's hard to understand. However, we have organizations like this that are intentional about their movement and nationalizing it. They have put forth candidates. They have a 56% win rate in school board races. They have won seats across 10 states and have 32 newly elected members. They have influenced 58 bills signed into law across the United States of America, HB 486 here in the state of Ohio included, SB 1 here in the state of Ohio included, a bill that is aimed to destroy diversity, equity, and inclusion in K through 12 public schooling here in Ohio is included. We have work to do as a people, as educators. I firmly believe that the movement has to come out of the classroom, and it is up to us as parents, as guardians, as teachers, as friends, as organizers, as community members to fight back. They have nationalized an engine that is reminiscent of what was the Daughters of the Confederacy, to change how we teach about American history so that people have a certain idea. What does this organization remind you of? The exact same thing. Again, I talk about this contradictory beauty of white supremacy, but it is the same playbook. Our playbook has to change. We have to be the ones that organize and strategize and act upon what it is that is outlined in the same Constitution that they try to weaponize against us. And yes, from the first session, lots of those documents were weaponized against us, but it is 2026. This is the 250th anniversary of this nation. Next month, we will celebrate the 100th anniversary of Black History Month. We have work to do. For the interest of time, I'm not going to share this video because I want to get into some more current things. But this video essentially is going to walk us through white supremacists getting together, right? And them getting together is going to be the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, right? Here in Ohio, our neighbors, Indiana, we know the Klan was very prominent there. In Tennessee with Nathan Bedford Forrest, right? This is homegrown domestic terrorism. To live in a country and have groups of people who are in masks, sheets, and hoods that call themselves grand wizards, that burn crosses in yards, that hung people from trees, that made it so that Black folks could not vote, and largely went unpunished. If what I am saying is reminiscent of what you experience when you look on social media today, it is not a coincidence. History will rhyme, history will echo. It might not repeat itself verbatim, but these similar sounds that we hear, these similar calls that we hear, these call to action, we have to hear the same kind of echoes of the movement and counter this nonsense. We have to go down to the school board. We have to go down to the state capitol. We have to use our voices as a collective for the greater good of America. For those of you that have not had the privilege of listening to Reverend Dr. Bernice A. King, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s youngest daughter, she said two things that were very powerful in her speech on King Day. Number one, she said the Civil Rights Act of '64 was to make sure that discrimination was illegal. And the other thing that she said that warmed my heart, but also makes me sad because of the weaponization. Leaders like her father, people like Diane Nash, our very own foot soldiers, Mr. Charles Malden, Miss Joanne Bland, rest her soul, Dr. Lowry, they did not risk their lives to divide the country, is what she said. They did not put their livelihoods on the line to divide the country. Simply saying, can we get what you wrote on paper, right? Dr. King's mountaintop speech, somewhere I read, right? So again, I'm not going to talk too much about this, but again, there's law that helps us talk about these things. The Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. You can read through, but Section 2 says it criminalizes conspiracies to overthrow or attack the U.S. government by force, threatening or harming officials or voters, obstructing justice, target voter intimidation and political violence, saying that the federal government will step in and intervene if states fail to protect its citizens' rights. They wrote these things down. Legislation exists. The question is, what are we willing to do about it? Yes, I'm currently working with Dr. Jeffries on a project here at Ohio State. If you haven't seen his latest Instagram post in reference to, he was on a podcast, I believe, this afternoon. Check that out because he talks about some of these things. Okay. Check out all of the things that the Institute has to offer you, right? If you are new to the Institute, come on in. Okay. We need you, not just you. And I'll let you finish that. Hopefully it resonates by now. If not, that means I haven't done a good enough job at repeating it, right? But not just you. All right. I want to switch gears and talk about this great replacement theory. Hopefully you have heard of it. If not, let's make the connection because we have work to do. 1973, there's a French author who is going to write a novel titled The Camp of Saints. Focus on what is highlighted. An apocalyptic tale that attempts to depict the destruction of whites, the Western society, at the hands of mass immigration from the global South. It has made its way through mainstream. This used to be on the fringes. It has made its way to the mainstream. Stephen Miller, okay, this comes from the National Immigration Forum, and I believe this was published, I want to say in 2018. I'll send you all the PDF that this contains, but this is prior to Stephen Miller having the job that he has now. This is prior to Steve Bannon being in the White House as an aide to the current president during that first term, okay? This is not new. I do want us to listen to this video. This is about, I want to say 3 minutes, so we'll reconvene on the other side of this.
Rally in Charlottesville, many of those who participated, who were neo-Nazis, who were members, who were the alt-right, have decided that Charlottesville represents to them the beginning of a white supremacist civil rights movement.
Replacement theory, also known as the Great Replacement, is not a new idea. Though this racist worldview has been around for more than a century, it's now part of our present-day political and media landscape. There are two versions of replacement theory. The first is promoted in explicitly white supremacist and anti-Semitic circles. It claims that Jews are orchestrating the replacement and eventual destruction of the white race.
We're talking about the ethnic cleansing of America and the destruction of the American way of life and a new Bolshevik-style society with no freedom of speech in this country. That's really where we're going in America, and that's got to change.
This paranoia plays into racist fears of quote-unquote white genocide. The second take on replacement theory used by right-wing media figures and elected officials promotes the racist idea that so-called real Americans are being replaced by Black and brown immigrants. The goal of this replacement? To force a demographic shift in the U.S., favoring Democrats and their liberal policies.
They're trying to change the population of the United States. And they hate it when you say that because it's true. Our country's being invaded by the rest of the world.
As mainstream figures continue to normalize replacement theory, they provide cover to extremists who can say they're only repeating what they heard on the radio or on TV. Extremist readings of replacement theory, combined with racist anxiety about a so-called white genocide, are the core motivator for some of the most horrific acts of violence we've seen over the past few years, targeting people of color, Jews, immigrants, and Muslims. The continued mainstreaming of this dangerous conspiracy puts vulnerable communities at serious risk and deepens the social and political divisions that allow extremists to thrive.
Again, this comes from the National Immigration Forum. Here are just a couple of elected officials, okay? Just a couple of elected officials and personalities, okay, that are known and have used this ideology today. It is again, the United States is a land where we should all be able to access and achieve our dreams, right? There has not been a mass targeting of people going into white communities and burning them down like they did in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We have not seen a retaliation where white folks are hanging from trees as they did to African and African Americans. We do not see the displacement of white people with their land being taken over as what was done to those who are indigenous and native to this land. So this all boils down to politics, right? And policy, again, this is why this ideology of politics gets bad and blurry. It is the idea that these people are going to start pushing through policy, which we are seeing today, that is rooted in this great replacement theory. I believe this is 1979 or 73, the Turner Diaries. It is referred to as the Bible of the racist right and a handbook for white victory and a blueprint for revolution. I watched a documentary where a man, and it might be this, the man who wrote this, it might be his son, but he said he grew up thinking that this was the gospel and that his father was a very sick man, but would be happy when he would see acts of violence because he believed that it was only going to be violence and a cleansing that saves the white race. Nothing about this is beneficial to us as Americans, and it only perpetuates violence. Now, I would be remiss if I did not bring up the words of the person who you see quoted here, because here in the state of Ohio, there is a bill. There is a bill that is named after him that talks about it is okay to teach the positives of Christianity. In that bill, the influence and the aim is for people to be able to, or teachers to be unshackled. These are his own words. We should unshackle our teachers to be able to teach a full picture of American history. And Representative Gary Click then went on to say that Charlie Kirk is someone who brought facts to his viewers. And when I asked him, because I met with him in his office, I said, Representative Click, do you know, are you aware of all the things that have been said? And he said, well, no, I don't listen to everything that he says. And then I answered, so why name a bill after someone who on various occasions has echoed the same thing about the great replacement theory to millions of his followers? And as the video outlined, 10 Black people killed because a young white male admitted, you can look this up in the transcripts of the court, admitted that he believed in what was being shown and told through the lens of this white supremacist theory, of the great replacement theory. He drove as far, he wanted to find the most densely populated area in Buffalo of African Americans, and he went to a local grocery store and killed 10 people. We also see this happening in Charleston, South Carolina. Okay, I believe the church was Bethel AME, where 9 parishioners are killed. Again, because of the influence that this ideology, this white supremacist ideology, has on the young minds of young men that probably could be functioning and contributing members to society had they not been, I'll use the word that is used often when we try to speak about the truth, indoctrinated to believe these things. It is Mother Emanuel Church, Mother Emanuel Church. But it goes on. This is Charlottesville we saw. We saw multiple synagogues, okay? The Tree of Life that was shot up. Again, all because of this ideology that people are going to replace them. America is a land of people who stumbled upon a place other than our native and indigenous brothers and sisters. This land is nothing but differences. The issue is letting go or being willing to concede or at least share this power. Okay. Which takes me to January 6th. The anniversary was not too long ago. The government puts out a website with taxpayer-funded dollars, okay, taxpayer dollars, that tries to whitewash this. And I think it is very fitting, ironic, and very sad that we see the Confederate flag being walked through the state capitol. For those of us that care about this country, for those of us that appreciate the history and are on the what I would consider the moral side of history, we all should take offense to the Confederacy, to the flag being flown in the state capitol. They did not respect what the United States was for. They did not respect the direction that it was headed, and they were willing to go to blows for it, and they did. I will never forget, I was teaching during COVID, and one of my students said, Mr. Kennedy, what's happening at the Capitol? And I had my phone up to the side and I didn't know what to say. Because never would I imagine that there would be people, again, this is not about politics. These are choices because of policy. These are choices because of policy. These are choices because of results of elections being willing to accept or not. And we know because it is documented. Again, it is beautiful because it is documented that this insurrection was all predicated on a fabrication. However, this is going to wake up different groups. I chose this last picture on the right. These are just a few of the groups that used to be on the fringes. You have Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, Three Percenters, and folks that are affiliated with this America First movement. The reason why this matters so much is because Stuart Rhodes, I believe he was the founder of the Oath Keepers. He was convicted and he was pardoned, just like the rest of the people in this photo, right? And I cannot speak to every single person. Those that were convicted of crimes were pardoned. One of those people, one of those persons was Stuart Rhodes. As we were celebrating or as we were gathering with the No Kings protests that were happening all across this nation, somebody mentioned Dr. Jeffries. Dr. Jeffries was speaking down at the state capitol. And I was taking my son because I wanted him to see what a demonstration looked like. As we are making our way through downtown Columbus, I saw Stuart Rhodes. If you're unfamiliar with who he is the white guy that has the eye patch. He was convicted. He is now out. I saw him with my own eyes. And I felt like I was in a movie because it was too real. I watched you on TV. I watched your trial. I watched your family talk about how you have slipped into this brain rot, believing everything that comes out of the current administration's mouth. And I saw him. I don't know what he was doing in Columbus, but I do know that means I have to continue to use my voice and do the work that I can to fight against these people. Now, I do not have proof, but there's reasonable suspicion because these groups have now gone quiet. The echo chambers that they used to occupy online aren't necessarily as poppin' as they used to be. One of my friends said, I wonder how many of those that were pardoned are now ICE agents. It's a question worth asking because what is happening right now? People are being targeted by the color of their skin, by people who are wearing masks. It is very scary. It is very scary. However, I will never, ever, ever lose hope because if we can make it from enslavement, there's enough power that we have to make it out of this. So if you were here with session one, this is a speech by Dr. King that he gave in 1967. So 3 years after the dream, 1 year before he is tragically assassinated. And he's talking about the other America. I'm going to play this towards the ending because, again, this is a man that was using history as a part of why he chose to use his voice and help mobilize people and lead a movement.
Our freedom, because however much America strays away from the ideals of justice, the goal of America is freedom. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up in the destiny of America. Before the Pilgrim Fathers landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before Jefferson etched across the pages of history the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence, we were here. Before the beautiful words of the Star-Spangled Banner were written, we were here. For more than 2 centuries, our forebears labored here without wages. They made cotton king. They built the homes of their masters in the midst of the most humiliating and oppressive conditions. Yet out of a bottomless vitality, they continued to grow and develop. I say that if the inexpressible cruelties of slavery couldn't stop us, the opposition that we now face, including the so-called white backlash, will surely fail. We're going to win our freedom because both the sacred of our nation and the eternal will of the Almighty God are embodied in our echoing demand. And so I can still sing, we shall overcome. We shall overcome because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. We shall overcome because Carlyle is right. No lie can live forever. We shall overcome because William Cullen Bryant is right. Truth crushed earth will rise again. We shall overcome because James Russell Lowell is right. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future. With faith, we will be able to hew out of the mounting of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to speed up the day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and live together as brothers and sisters all over this great nation. That will be a great day. That will be a great tomorrow. In the word, to speak symbolically, that will be the day when the morning stars will sing together and the sons of God will shout for joy. Thank you.
I invite all of you to listen to that speech in totality. I have a deep affinity for Dr. King, and I often feel that it is my purpose to try to do something that would continue and make that legacy proud. And I feel like we all have to do something. Okay. The title of this lecture series is called Reclaiming Patriotism for a Reason. I long struggled to love this country because I feel like I have more than a reason not to sometimes, given the legacy that my ancestors suffered. Knowing that I have a 3 times great grandfather that served in the Civil War, knowing that he was once enslaved, knowing that my grandmother was born on a plantation, not as a slave, but as a sharecropper, knowing that she was a housemaid. She was not allowed to go to school. 1924, Lowndes County, Alabama, in between Selma and Montgomery. Not having the ability to be read to by my grandmother because she just couldn't, because she wasn't allowed to go to school. All right. It is not lost on me. But to reclaim patriotism is for us to take back the narrative, tell the full picture of the United States. It is for us to be reminded of the greatness of our founding in terms of the idea of democracy, in terms of the idea of the United States, in terms of the idea of a government that is constructed of its people, represented fairly. It is our job to honor those that have put their lives on the line and sacrificed so that we could have access to the American dream. And the point of this session is to also remind us how white supremacy has infected the American dream to be attainable for people that look like me and those others that fit categories that don't seem to be okay with whatever this perceived majority is. And if nothing else, we must redefine it. We have to redefine patriotism by being proud to say, yes, I am proud to be a member of the United States because it is what I do with my time in this country and on this earth that will lead to more contributions for this land to be better. It is not to have these rosy colored glasses and love the United States blindly. Absolutely not. The people that love you the most are the ones that are willing to hold you accountable, especially when you are wrong. The ones that are able to tell you the truth, even if it might hurt. But often that truth is for us to find a way to do something better, for us to be better for ourselves. Then the byproduct of us being better as self is everybody gets a better version of you. All of us must do what we can to reclaim the idea and the identity of what a patriot is. It is somebody that has a love for country. I have a United States flag in my office right next to my Black Lives Matter flag because it is not lost on me. And I hope that it is not lost on any of you. We all will have struggles because the United States has given us enough of a reason to be down and out sometime. But can you imagine where we would be if certain people who had it a little bit worse gave up? If those people on that bridge decided we're not going to pursue this march, this peaceful demonstration to protest. I cannot let that go in vain because too much has been sacrificed, whether it was purposefully or whether it was because it was their duty or whether it was by accident, for us not to reclaim patriotism and invite those of us that agree with this idea of just sharing the country. Imagine if our policies were fair and equitable across the board. Who loses? Unless you are only focused on power for yourself. And I believe that there are more of us that are willing to share power, to come together and collaborate to make this thing a lot better than what it is, because this cannot be the best that America has to offer us. The Civil Rights Act and that movement cannot be the best that we have to offer ourselves and my child and those of us that have children. What more can you do? What more can I do? What more can we do to convene and congregate? To figure out a way to tell a picture about the United States of America that is just a mirror to say, hey, this is where we come from and this is where we can go. With that, I am going to conclude. We have about 10 minutes for questions. The next session is going to be next Thursday. I got a couple emails about people not having access to the links, so I will make sure that everybody in the follow-up email has a good registration link in the Zoom link to join us. The 29th is when we are going to get together. We are going from classroom to country. I'm going to outline some of the things that I've done in more detail since I've gone down to the state capitol. Outline ways for us to get in the fight and stay in the fight. And I put QR codes to some of my latest articles that I've written. I wrote an article about the other America, and it references a lot of what Dr. King was talking about. And I just started doing a couple videos, just kind of outlining current events and what's happening here in Ohio. So you can scan that as well. I thank you all. With that, I'm going to stop sharing. And I am going to, if there are any contributions, I know there are a couple people here. I'm going to stop the recording. So thank you all for coming tonight. And if you have time for questions, I'll take some questions. If there are contributions, then I will take some.